first off, what are your key takeaways from Trump's second inauguration?
Well, first of all, hindi ito yung first time na nag-move indoor, no? Yung event actually back in 1985 under former President Reagan when he had won what was truly a landslide victory, more than 500 electoral college victory, close to 60% of the vote. That was a landslide, what Reagan experienced when he ran against a former vice president from the Democratic Party. That was really a huge landslide. And that was the last time before this na meron tayong indoor situation na ganon with all of the pomp and circumstance that came minus the, of course, the freezing cold there in Washington, D.C. Now, it's important to talk about the Reagan precedents because when Reagan first won against President Carter, he was also quite dismissed as a kind of a fringe character, kind of an extremist, ultra conservative, and of course the fact that he was a former Hollywood actor, and some would say B movie Hollywood actor, many were dismissive towards him. By the time that he delivered his inauguration in 1985, the world saw a very different Reagan, a Reagan that was not defensive, the Reagan that didn't feel that he had to prove himself, but we saw a Reagan that was very subdued, self-confident, and ultimately felt vindicated with his own conservative agenda for America, which has echoed throughout the decades. Now, why am I saying that? I think in many ways you can say we have a similar vibe here with Donald Trump. Of course, in the case of Donald Trump, it was not an immediate re-election. He lost the race in 2020, whatever he wants to say about that. But he's back as the 45th and 47th president right now. And you could also see very much subdued, right? He was subdued, he was statesmanlike. You didn't see the excess energy, entertainment value there. You had that more in the MAGA rally where Elon Musk made some would say awkward gestures among others. But going back to this, we can talk about Elon Musk shortly. But going
Later,
back to
yeah.
this, I think this is a Trump that felt extremely vindicated. If you look at the people who were in attendance, all the former Democratic presidents still alive were there. So you had Bill Clinton, you had Obama, Bush, who I think was not very enamored with Trump's first inauguration back in 2016 and said some very unsavory things about that first inauguration was there. So I think this was a projection of moment of unity because you also had the major tech entrepreneurs there, practically all of the richest men in America, Zuckerberg, the owners of Amazon, of course, Elon Musk, the head of Google, everyone there, and not to mention even the head of the biggest fashion industry in the world was there, right? So I think it was also an acceptance of Donald Trump as a reality in our world because for a long time I think the Democrats, the liberals, tried to wish him away and to dismiss the 2016 as a kind of a freak accident. But now I think it has dawned on everyone from tech entrepreneurs to fashion icons and fashion billionaires to even Democrats that Donald Trump is not a freak accident. Donald Trump is a very much a reflection of our era. And just as I said, in the case of Reagan in 1985, he used his inauguration to talk about a new age of American conservative politics. I think here we might legitimately be looking towards a new era of MAGA politics under Trump. Now, it's a question what that's going to exactly look like, of course, in the coming years.
Yeah, Richard, you mentioned about how subdued he was. Now, as you all know, there's a PR team behind President Donald Trump. Now, do you think this is a calculated move on his part to try to maybe his last run in this office to portray his legacy as a qualified president, to ditch aside the joke tag he had on him the first time around?
Well, I mean, it's not like he was nice in things that he said, right? So the subdued was more the mannerism, right? It was more the style.
Yeah.
But he immediately went digging into, right? And really not only throwing shades, but openly rejecting everything that practically all of the other presidents standing next to him have been standing for. Trump made it absolutely clear that the new golden era is going to start, that America's decline will be over, and that he will reverse all of the massive mistakes throughout the years. So essentially, right, he was standing next to what his supporters would call the establishment, and he completely, essentially lambasted them. And of course, just barely into office, right? He signed a whole series of executive agreements, getting rid of dozens or reversing dozens of Biden's executive agreement. So it was quite interesting to see how the Democratic presidents and predecessors next to him, not to mention even Bush, the more traditional conservatives next to him, were able to take it. I think if I were to use the term, I think everyone's hope is that they'll have a bear hug strategy that works. Because if you look at it, Biden had a very friendly exchange with Donald Trump when Trump visited the White House a few weeks ago, right, to oversee the transition.
Yes, that's right.
Obama had an extremely friendly, cordial exchanges with him during the memorial and funeral of former President Carter. Zuckerberg, a lot of other what were used to be seen liberal stalwart tech billionaires have been also chumming up to Donald Trump. Of course, Donald Trump also got tremendously positive reception, friendly reception in France from President Macron and much of the European French leadership, which tend to be more liberal, obviously, than Trump. I think the New Yorker in Trump is getting a lot of love, is getting a lot of affirmation that he has been seeking decade after decade. But at the end of the day, there's going to be also that Florida Trump that is,
Yeah.
that is going to come out very soon. And in fact, with his latest executive agreements, I think the Florida Trump is something that is going to be more of a reality than the New Yorker Trump, the celebrity Trump, the more liberal, close to, the A-list celebrity kind of Trump. So I think this is the duality with Trump because he started his career in New York. He was a New Yorker. He supported Democrats throughout the years. But in the twilight decades of his life, he has shifted to become a new force of conservatism in the world, not just in the U.S.
Yeah, we were talking about Richard a while ago about, of course, he's being subdued, but one of his executive orders that already has an impact in terms of optics, it was saying that the several documents from Martin Luther King to Robert Kennedy to JFK are overclassified, and therefore he will declassify them to make them available ahead of time to the American people. Now, what message is he trying to send by doing this?
Well, obviously, if you saw during his speech, he also talked about essentially the witch hunt against him, right? That he has been a victim of the deep state. So the kind of rhetoric that we used to hear from the Alex Jones and Rush Limbaugh and some of the fringes of the conservative movement 10, 15, 20 years ago, now is not only mainstream, you're hearing it from the bully pulpit of the president himself. Essentially, this argument that I'm here to clean up the system, I'm here to drain and to weaken and push back against the deep state. So that's very much along those lines. Of course, if you look at this peak for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, right? If you look at this peak for a lot of top positions, of course, even previous peak for the Department of Justice, but even the latest one speak for the Department of Justice, clearly the MAGA versus establishment deep state narrative is very much there. So again, I need to clarify when I say subdued, it was more the manner and avoidance of certain incendiary language. But I think the content was very consistent, not to mention also consistent with his very strong immigration position, right? He just declared immigration essentially an emergency on the border of America and the South. I made the massive influx of millions of illegal immigrants, and he made it clear that he's gonna stick to the Remain in Mexico plan that he negotiated during his first term. So that was quite interesting for me. Nevertheless, of course, this is gonna be, I'm not gonna, well, you could say there are elements of unity team here, right? Because on one hand, we just had a confirmation of a perfect vote for Marco Rubio to be the next Secretary of State, and Marco Rubio obviously is, well, as far as foreign policy, republicanism is concerned, quite traditional, right? It's tough on China, tough on Russia, friendly and supportive of allies and friends. He got, I think, 99-0 votes because he's a senator. Of course, maybe that helped. But he said everything right during his confirmation hearing, if you really followed him. But at the same time, you have people like Elon Musk, right, who are trying to cut a deal with TikTok. And I think one of the things that caught the attention of everyone was the TikTok CEO there, right, and having his very proud moment, right. I don't know if that was a accidental picture, but he was kind of looking like a snooty one next to, of course, the incoming Tulsi Gabbard, the incoming National Director for Intelligence, which some people were trying to interpret, does this mean anything? No, because the thing is, there are contradictory streams within this MAGA 2.0 of Trump. There's this very tough anti-China stance you're hearing from Marco Rubio of the rest, and at the same time, you're also hearing these elements of friendliness towards China, including what Donald Trump said. But going back to your question, you have an RFK Jr. in your cabinet, right? Who has been a bastion of alternative theories about reality. So the other thing we also see with the MAGA movement, and as I said, it's this embrace of the kind of a deep state conspiracy theories and sometimes actual conspiracy, because life also has actual conspiracy. So I think this is also Trump's way of saying, I'm not only going to go after people who had a hunt against me, I'm also going to go after people who try to cover the truth from the American people and the world. So again, it's a very anti-establishment, anti-system messaging, except presented in a far more subdued manner than we're used to when it comes to Donald Trump.
Right. A lot of people have said that during the Biden administration, the country or the U.S. have become too far left. And right now, ang concern naman nila, the country, the U.S. under the Trump administration will become too far right. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think when it comes to cultural issues, identity politics, and so-called woke stuff, indeed America significantly moved towards the left of the center, right? Not as far as European countries. I mean, if I were to use European countries as a yardstick, the U.S. is still a very much centrist, conservative country. But I think on economic issue, the U.S. did not move as far to the left as many people say. The U.S. healthcare system is not still fully socialized like neighboring Canada. It's incomparable to what you see in Germany, never mind Scandinavia. If you look at America's minimum wage situation across many states, if you look at the conditions of labor, among other things, America is not, it's still a very much, in my opinion, libertarian capitalist system compared to much more socialized system you see in much of European Union, and of course in neighboring Canada, not to mention New Zealand and even Australia. So I don't buy the argument that the US has moved to the left on economic issues in as much as the conservatives put it. But yes, as I think as on the cultural front, identity politics front, right, indeed, I think many Americans felt things are moving so much to the left, or at least they're not comfortable with. And I got this from conversation with folks in America from South Carolina to Georgia to DC to California. So including Republicans, obviously in California. I've been talking to folks throughout the year, and indeed there's a sense that maybe the cultural issues are a little bit too fast for a lot of folks to absorb. But are we going to move towards far right? Well, I think on issues like, for instance, deregulation, I think the Trump 2.0 administration will be very strong in deregulating things. As we speak, he has announced that the U.S. will withdraw from the Paris Agreement. This is the climate change agreement. This is the green agenda that the Democrats have been very invested in. He barely mentioned climate change. Perhaps it's one of the reasons why he had to do this indoor and not outside, because some would say perhaps what we're seeing, the extreme weather conditions in one way or another, is affected by climate change. So I think on the regulation, the U.S. is going to move way to the right. And you are going to see reversals of a lot of green technology moves by the former administrations, particularly the Democratic administration of Biden and Obama. I think on the cultural part, it will be very contested, but nevertheless, of course, a lot of federal funding for some of the so-called controversial education programs, that have to do with critical race theory, or revisionist theory, maybe on those things. But what for me really is the big question is, does a second Trump administration also means moving to the right in terms of undermining checks and balances, meaning moving towards a much more authoritarian populist system that we saw in other countries, like most notably in Hungary, right, under Viktor Orban, who has been hailed as one of the heroes of the MAGA movement. In fact, I think Orban was invited, the Hungarian. So there were like only a half a dozen or so foreign leaders who were invited. I know many in the Philippines, we'll talk about Philippines, and made an issue that BBM was not invited. But actually very konti lang invited. Giorgia Meloni, the post-fascist or new conservative alt-right party in Italy representative. You had Milei, of course, another libertarian conservative from Argentina, and then the Hungarian leader. So a couple of them were invited, and I think that the two or three of them showed up, including the Argentinian and the Italian leader last time I checked. So if you go back to it, for me, that's the big question. Is the U.S. also going to move way to the right in terms of I mean, there are some crazy theories I'm hearing, like Yarvin, one of the theorists in the conservative movement, is talking about creating kind of a modern monarchy or something like that, right? Why is this important? Because look at the TikTok debate, right? the TikTok issue is very important. Just over the past 48 hours, we don't know what on earth is going to happen with the TikTok situation, because TikTok, there was a law that was passed, bipartisan, went to the Supreme Court, got cleared, and then based on that law, the only reason you'll give a reprieve to the ban before the ban takes effect is if there's a significant indication of a change in the position of ByteDance, which is the mother company. I am yet to hear that significant change in position, meaning are they offering this, meaning they're willing to give up their data centers to America and not keep it in China. I'm still not hearing any evidence of that. And Cotton, Senator Cotton, who's a Republican senator, he said that actually there's no more point in a reprieve because the ban has already been effectuated. We're past it. But nevertheless, it's still possible for Trump to push an executive agreement that could almost supersede both the Supreme Court and the legislature, both of which are controlled by conservatives. So we are in some gray zone. So that's the thing that I'm going to look at. But obviously on immigration, America's going to move way to the right, right?
Right.
On the regulation, including Bitcoin, digital currency, environmental regulation, it's going to move way to the right, at least compared to not only U.S. Under Democrats, but also much of the Western or OECD countries.
Okay. Now, Richard, hold your thoughts. We have a lot of questions for you. But for the meantime, let me just read this. Trump pledged to rescue America from what he described as the years of betrayal and decline. Now, Trump said, quote, "From this moment on, America's decline is over." His half-hour speech echoed some of the themes he sounded at his first inauguration in 2017, when he spoke of the American carnage of crime and job loss that he said had ravaged the country. The president also talked about the assassination attempts against him, saying he was, quote, "saved by God to make America great again." The inauguration completes a triumphant return for Trump, who was impeached twice, survived 2 assassination attempts, and was convicted in a criminal trial.
From this moment on, America's decline is over. Our liberties and our nation's glorious destiny will no longer be denied, and we will immediately restore the integrity, competency, and loyalty of America's government. The golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world.
President Donald Trump also emphasized peace efforts between Israel and Gaza, stating his goal of becoming a peacemaker. The newly sworn-in president received applause from his predecessor, former President Joe Biden, when he mentioned the release of hostages in the Middle East.
My proudest legacy will be that of a peacemaker and unifier. That's what I want to be, a peacemaker and a unifier. I'm pleased to say that as of yesterday, one day before I assumed office, the hostages in the Middle East are coming back home to their families. America will reclaim its rightful place as the greatest, most powerful, most respected nation on earth, inspiring the awe and admiration of the entire world.
Richard, so the Trump administration has taken credit on the recently approved ceasefire deal in Gaza. So what do you think, how much effort or work has he put in before it was approved?
Well, I mean, this deal technically was the same deal that was offered by Biden 7, 8, 9, 10 months ago. So this was not a new deal. The only thing that made it new are, of course, the changed circumstances in the Middle East. Of course, the military operations that, according to Israel, have been successful over the past few months in terms of degrading the capability of their nemesis and rivals, not to mention the fall of the Assad regime in Syria. But more important, I would say, is because Donald Trump, unlike Biden or the Democrats, I would say, he knows how to remind everyone who is the superpower, right? In fact, that was the complaint of Bill Clinton back in the day when he was dealing with some unruly allies. He said, "Who is the superpower here?" Right? Donald Trump knows to remind everyone, when you deal with me, I am the president of the superpower of the world. So I think that was absolutely clear to the Israelis. And here you could see the US has tremendous amount of leverage over Israel. More than 70% of the weapon systems that were used in Gaza operations over the past 15 months were tax funded by the American people. The United States remains as the major arbiter of peace and order in the Middle East. So when Trump sent his envoy to Israel, that person made it clear, you're gonna make it sure that when Trump takes over, things are gonna look nicer than how they are, and we don't want any distraction from his amazing inauguration to come. So it works. I mean, that's just the reality of our era. When you deal with strong-willed leaders, including leaders of allied nations or rivals like Putin or Xi Jinping or whatnot, sometimes having someone like Trump who knows who's the superpower does work.
Yeah. Richard, during the campaign of President Donald Trump, he mentioned lengthily about de-escalating all sorts of tensions in the Middle East, and Israel was mentioned, among other things. Now that he has this peace deal in place, how long do you think this ceasefire will hold between Hamas and Israel? And do you think President Donald Trump will be able to broker a deal, a lengthy deal that will hold longer for both sides?
Well, as far as the Middle East is concerned, there are many moving parts here, right? First of all, it's the Israeli politics itself. I think last time I checked, Ben Gavir, I think if Smotrich and a couple of more alt-right, far-right members of Netanyahu's cabinet in protest, they walked out of the cabinet. So at the end of the day, Netanyahu is a politician. He wants to survive. So let's see what is his next game when it comes to his politics. My understanding is that the text of the ceasefire agreement is flexible enough to give operational dexterity to the Israelis if they feel that they have to go back into a kind of an offensive operation again in the coming weeks and months. So no, there's absolutely no guarantee that this ceasefire agreement will hold and be fully effectuated for months to come, because the domestic politics of Israel itself is up in the air. But I think as far as the Middle East is concerned, there are many moving parts. One is what's Trump going to do with the new Syrian administration, because the Syrian regime is now led by HTS, the leader of which, al-Shara, Golani, used to be a former Al-Qaeda member, right? How are you going to deal with them? And then, of course, the Iranians are also sending signal of openness to dialogue and a peaceful, negotiation over their nuclear program. Will Trump do what Nixon did in the 1970s? As you know, of course, again, going back to history, Richard Nixon, because he was known as a tough guy, and of course he was accompanied by a smart diplomat like Henry Kissinger, they were able to bring China out of the cold and eventually cut a deal, and no one could accuse Richard Nixon of being weak. So Trump's kind of tough man, at least persona, and being a Republican in many ways, and the Republicans controlling both Senate and Congress, I think gives him tremendous amount of leeway to potentially negotiate a lasting peace deal with the Iranians, and that will be part and parcel of any major deal to bring stability in the Middle East. Otherwise, I really cannot see how the Middle East could be stable anytime soon unless the major power there, Iran and the United States, come to some sort of understanding, which obviously will be opposed by many, and depending on what version comes out, including potentially the Israelis. But on the global level, I think Donald Trump, at once, this is where we see doublespeak, right? He's very good in that. At once, he's saying all of these good things about China, right? All of these things that, I culture. And he correctly calls Xi Jinping chairman, because Xi Jinping is not just the president. He is the paramount leader. Chairman Xi Jinping. He invited Chairman Xi Jinping to the inauguration. He's saying all of these good things. He wants to cut a deal on TikTok. But at the end of the day, the people who run everyday defense and foreign policy of America are Marco Rubio, Elbridge Colby, Hagseth, who are all known as people who see China as the number one threat to the United States, right? So I can see many permutations here. Some theories would say that maybe Trump will try to cut a deal with Russia and the Iranians, so that he makes sure China is isolated, so that those three
Exactly.
powers are not together. Kind of like what Nixon did, right? When he took out the Chinese from the Sino-Soviet kind of axis back in the Cold War days. Some are saying that, China is just so economically important, it will be a different deal with them because they're so powerful militarily, and maybe Taiwan is not as important to Trump, but Trump will be tougher on Iran, or probably even tough on Russia, because Zelensky and Macron were successful enough in convincing him to. So I can see a million permutations here. So I think if anyone pretends to know what exactly Trump is gonna do, I don't think they know what they're talking about. Because if there's one thing that is consistent about Trump, is a degree of unpredictability that sometimes is intentional, but sometimes it's just temperamental, right?
Yeah.
So the only
Yes.
thing we can really think about is who are the people he puts in position of power. And when you look at Marco Rubio, we look at the Pete Hegseth, we look at the top policy guys, they're very China hawks, and they want the US to primarily focus on our region. So actually, yes, they're good news for us in the Philippines, because we want to focus on China. China is the number one threat to the rules-based international order, at least from a Filipino perspective, at least from a Taiwan perspective, and a West Philippine Sea disputes perspective.
Yeah, Richard, before we move forward very quickly, let's bring in Steve Witkoff. He's a key figure in sealing the deal. So what are your thoughts on that? Because President Donald Trump and Steve was supposedly, they play together. He's a real estate developer. So what are your thoughts on bringing this man in the picture with regards to the Gaza deal, ceasefire deal?
Yeah, I mean it's a billionaires club, right? If you look at the cabinet of Trump, Bernie Sanders, the progressive senator, openly is calling it the oligarchy. Some are calling
Yes.
it new feudalism, right? Which is quite interesting because Trump ran as the guy who will save poorer Americans from illegal immigration and inflation, etc. But if you look at it, this is the most billionaire cabinet probably anywhere in the world. That says a lot. No, I mean Donald Trump is really known for someone who prioritizes two things: loyalty and rapport, right? So if he feels you, if he thinks you got what it takes, and at the same time he feels you're loyal, you share his worldview, he's going to put you in positions of influence, including being a special envoy to the Middle East and dealing with this very sensitive Gaza issue. And you can see, I mean, this real estate people are not experts on international law or Middle East politics, etc., but they get things done because they know the fundamental truth, which is who is the superpower, right? And they
Yeah,
work
yeah.
accordingly. And I think that was the problem with the Biden administration. Too many supposedly smart people there who are really weak in negotiation. They knew a lot about the world, but they didn't know about the fundamental thing, which was they're representing the world's superpower. So when they deal with allies, they didn't come off as decisive. Now, one Republican senator, this is Lindsey Graham, at least according to the book by Bob Woodward, said if you look at the Mar-a-Lago, it's more like a North Korean court or something like that. In a sense, like Trump is the supreme leader, right? And everyone is clapping for him, and everyone wants to be on his good side. And for Trump, the number one thing is loyalty, and of course, rapport has to be there. So again, let's not be surprised if a couple of interesting characters end up doing very sensitive job. Elon Musk, as we speak, we have to get back to him because he's very, very important person.
Yeah.
Elon
We'll
Musk,
talk
Elon
later
Musk
on.
is, yeah, of course, he's very important person on technical level because what 50-60% of satellites up there are owned by Elon Musk, and that share could increase unless Jeff Bezos and the rest catch up. And the Chinese, obviously, Russians and others. But it's also because he has a kind of a de facto diplomat role. From what we understand, he has been having conversation with multiple countries, including allegedly there was a New York Times report that he is in conversation with the Iranian mission in the United Nations. Obviously, when it comes to Elon Musk, he has a lot of investments in China. I was just in Tesla here in Makati, BGC, the other day, and all of our Teslas here come from Shanghai, right? So any Tesla you see here in Asia comes from Shanghai. So he is deeply invested in the Chinese market and production facilities, right? And at times he said he might not allow the Taiwanese, for instance, or Americans use SpaceX. SpaceX satellites if ever there's a war with China. He had a meeting with the Chinese top leadership, the premier of China, just a few months ago. And as we understand, he also has a good rapport with Vladimir Putin. and the Kremlin elite. Some people he has been talking to over the past few years, and there were times that he didn't allow the Ukrainians to use his satellite technology, and he essentially intervened and interfered and dictated the terms of or tempo of the conflict in Ukraine. So Elon Musk is an unprecedented figure. This is a billionaire, richest man in the world who has no qualms whatsoever to leverage his economic and financial and technological power into geopolitical and diplomatic power. Because he's born, of course, in South Africa, he can never become an American president, right? He's not a naturally born American. But some are saying he's positioning himself as a parallel president, not only as a parallel pillar of diplomacy, which to me, kind of, parang unity team. I see a unity team dynamic brewing, and let's see how long this will last. Yeah.
I know. We'll talk about more Elon Musk later on, but during his inaugural speech, President Donald Trump expressed gratitude to the Black and Hispanic communities for their support. Now, he vowed that his administration would make Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream a reality.
To the Black and Hispanic communities, I want to thank you for the tremendous outpouring of love and trust that you have shown me with your vote. We set records, and I will not forget it. I've heard your voices in the campaign, and I look forward to working with you in the years to come. Today is Martin Luther King Day, and his honor, this will be a great honor, but in his honor, we will strive together to make his dream a reality. We will make his dream come true.
Richard, one of the posturing that I saw from Donald Trump was he's trying to position himself as a person against racism. Truth be told, in his speech, he mentioned about their government will be colorblind and instead will be merit-based. And he has sayings like he will make Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream a reality. He's going to declassify the assassination attempt of Martin Luther King. Now, what is your take on all of a sudden from being tagged as a bigot, now he's transitioning into somebody who is against systematic racism?
Well, I mean, Donald Trump always denied that he was a racist, right? He's a very good friend of, African American top celebrities, whether it's 50 Cent, Kanye West, among others. I think he was with Kanye West when he first declared that he's going to run for the presidency back in the day. So, he always claimed that, he's a big fighter for a more racially just America. But the reality is that, of course, he stands against all of this kind of critical race theory, all of this educational curriculum, innovations over the past few years that try to shed light on the dark past of America. Because let's not forget, America was one of the biggest operators of slave plantations way into modernity, right? That much of American capitalism was built on the toils of millions and millions of slave workers way into the 18th century, and some would say beyond. So, and eventually they had a civil war to address that. For me, Donald Trump is someone who's gonna always try to say he's a transcendental leader. He's gonna, but for me, it was more of a gratitude for the demographic shift we saw in the latest elections. Because if you listened to punditry and experts 10 years ago, in fact, if you read the post-mortem of the Republican Party after Romney lost to Obama in 2012, their fundamental argument was that demography was against the Republican Party, right? The Republican Party was nothing but a shrinking party of mostly Caucasian, quote-unquote, white Americans, and that the minorities would all go to the Democrats, and the idea was that, okay, the best we can do is just to win the low participation races in the Congress, whatever, and then good luck na lang sa presidential race. And then Donald Trump came and completely changed the game, and we saw that in the latest elections, right? That was a game changer because as not majority, let's just be clear, still the majority of African Americans, male and female, and also Latinos still vote for Democrats. The same thing with Filipino Americans. I don't know, I think there are more Filipinos pro-Trump than Filipino Americans. But the small number that used to vote for Republicans has significantly expanded. And in fact, there are two demographics that work very well for Trump. That's why he won practically all battleground states. Is first the male African Americans and definitely male Latinos. He did very well with them compared to expectations for a Republican candidate. But more importantly, also among Gen Z African Americans and younger people of minority background, because these people were very much hurt by inflation. You see, inflation really
Right.
hurt a lot of young people. And I would say this is where we also have to give credit to Donald Trump's youngest son, right? Who's a teenager,
Yeah.
studying in NYU, smart kid, studying business. He understands the psyche of the younger generation. I think he played a very important role in convincing his dad to do all the podcasts across America, all
Yeah.
the big podcasts. That was the
That's true.
influence of Barron. I think Barron was the de facto kind of youth outreach strategist of Trump. He's also launching now Bitcoins, I think, for his mom and dad and all of that. So that's where I think he did very well. And I think if you're Donald Trump, you'll say, well, if I were a racist and bigot, why are all these folks from minority backgrounds voting for me? So he feels vindicated by that. But I think to say that he's a man who will continue the legacy of Martin Luther King, I'm sure a lot of people will raise their eyebrows, especially from the other side of this fence.
Yeah, and right after saying that, he said, as of today, it will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female. Right?
Well, that's actually where also America is moving to the right, no, on the religious front. One of the things that we see with well, not only Trump administration but the MAGA movement is the growing influence of conservative Catholicism. The vice president is a convert to Catholicism, a very proud Catholic, right? If you see a lot of big influencers, right, within the MAGA movement and also the Trump administration, a lot of them have Catholic leanings. The Supreme Court, by the way, this is the most Catholic Supreme Court, I think, in American history or recent history. And of course, Donald Trump, during his campaign, and of course during his inauguration, spoke in ways that you haven't heard for a long time from Western leaders, right? Essentially, an expression of religiosity. He mentioned how God saved him and that he feels there is this mission. I won't say messianic sense, but definitely, I think to be fair to Trump, some people who talk to him in private would also say that he somehow changed after at least the first assassination attempt. Somehow noticed that perhaps there is the burden of history on his shoulders. Now, I'm not his pastor or I'm not his religious spiritual leader, but I won't discount that a part of Donald Trump that is going to be different from the previous iteration is that this is going to be a much more religiously oriented, if not Catholic oriented president, considering the importance of the Catholic movement and Catholic converts within the conservative and MAGA movement in recent years. So yes, America will move to the right in a sense that you're going to see more explicit expression of religiosity, Christian religiosity, Catholic religiosity by America's top leaders. And some would argue that we already see a reflection of that in the Supreme Court rulings, right? That you could perhaps see the Catholic, values of some of the justices also reflected in some of the important rulings in recent years by the Supreme Court. So this is fascinating, right? Because again, 10, 15 years ago, remember, it was it 2014-15 when the same-sex union was finalized by the Supreme Court. If you look at the pundits, things they were saying from 2012 when Romney lost, and then now you look at 2025, it looks like we're in a completely different universe. That's why I'm calling it the age of disruption. On every front, we're seeing complete, essentially, undermining of a lot of long-held received wisdom. And I think we're indeed entering a completely new era, not only in American politics, but in global politics.
So much issues to discuss, but we are just getting started. Our special coverage of the inauguration of U.S. President Donald Trump continues after a short break. Keep it here on One News. Now, good morning. You're still watching Brunch here on One News,
Yes.
our special coverage for the 47th U.S. President inauguration.
Which is Donald J. Trump. This is his second time as
Yes.
president. Pero hindi siya back-to-back because in between, Biden became president. He just reclaimed now his throne.
Yes, that's right. Okay, so the inauguration was held earlier. It's
Yeah,
actually 11 or 12.
Ang dami na nga nangyari, but he signed several executive orders already. And he already ditched a lot of executive orders from Joe Biden. In essence, 77
Yeah.
or 78 na rescission orders. So,
Mamaya, isa-isahin natin yan. But former U.S. presidents were in attendance as Donald Trump was sworn in as the 47th President of the United States. Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush witnessed Trump's inauguration at the U.S. Capitol Rotunda in Washington, D.C. Accompanying them were former First Ladies Hillary Clinton and Laura Bush. Meanwhile, Michelle Obama skipped the ceremony. Former President Joe Biden also attended Trump's inauguration. In a farewell speech, Biden said, quote, "We're leaving the office, but we're not leaving the fight."
You know, but the point I want to make today is to make clear my farewell address, as we all do have we have a lot more to do. We heard the inaugural address today. We got a lot more to do. I know from many years of experience, they're up and down, but we have to stay with it. My dad taught me the measure of a person, you heard me say it before, is how quickly they get back up when they get knocked down. That's what we have to do right now. We've always done our best as Americans. We never, never, never give up. Never. We're leaving office, but we're not leaving the fight. You're smart, you're skilled, you're passionate. The country needs you again. So all you can, stay engaged in all the ways you can. Whether it's in public service, the private sector, philanthropy, academia, running for office yourself, or anything else you choose to do. I give you my word, we believe in you. We, Jill and I, our family, believe in you.
Trump was sworn in the presence of notable politicians and also tech billionaires. His guest list included Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, and Apple leader Tim Cook, who took prime seats at St. John's Church. The guests witnessed Trump take the oath of office. Musk, the CEO of SpaceX and Tesla, revved up a crowd of Trump supporters at an inaugural rally in Washington. He spent hundreds of millions of dollars to help Trump get elected and has been appointed by him to co-lead an unofficial Department of Government Efficiency.
This is what victory feels like. Yeah. Elections, they come and go. Some elections are, important, some are not. But this one, this one really mattered. And I just want to say thank you for making it happen. It is thanks to you that the future of civilization is assured.
Yeah,
All right,
so we have,
Let's bring back in Richard to join us in the conversation. Very interesting and animated.
Ayun na inaantay mo, si Elon Musk.
Richard, we have to talk about Elon Musk for a bit before we talk about the other things. Now, one of the things that Trump is trying to push for is the cancellation or the end of birthright citizenship.
Yeah.
You were mentioning that he can never be president, Elon Musk, because he is from South African descent. Now, do you think this is connected with Trump's attempt to probably grooming Elon Musk to be the next president?
I don't know. Maybe you can ask the
Paving the
American.
way.
There could be a lot of wild theories. What is? I'm sure the more folks from Democratic persuasion will say that this was more a way of racializing, right? Or putting some sort of a category on who is truly American or not, or at least unfortunately, that's how it has been interpreted by certain quarters. So I think Vivek Ramaswamy, for instance, and Elon Musk, when they got into some debates over visas for high-end immigrant workers, you saw the kind of almost racialized debate that and floodgates that it opened within the MAGA movement. And that's why I said this could be like a unity team. So let's see how this is going to evolve in the coming days and weeks or so. But yeah, I mean, you can always come up with some conspiracy theory that, if Elon Musk is really as influential as some people think, he'll eventually push, Trump, but eventually has to push also the Congress. and
That's right,
ultimately
right.
the Supreme Court, right, to make some fundamental changes that would allow someone of him who's foreign born to become American president. I think that's a bit far fetched, but
But Richard, the reason why I asked you this is because, well, we know Elon Musk is part of an unofficial role at Department of Government Efficiency, which is clearly not defined what that role is about. But if you take a look at the word government efficiency, it's like a QA, like Quality Assurance Department of a call center, that he oversees all the departments run efficiently. Now, do you think this is similar to that of an executive secretary that he, if and when President Trump becomes too old in a couple of years, he'll be calling the shots?
well, there's a vice president there. Let's not forget. I mean, it's like I think people are a little bit underestimating
Remember,
the.
Richard,
Yeah.
Elon is the billionaire.
Yeah, but I mean, the vice president also made a ton of money as a venture capitalist, and he's a good friend of Thiel, who's also one of the
Yes, that's
PayPal
right.
mafia boys. So I mean, I mean, again, I think some people have been too dismissive of the vice president. I think he's someone who could also play an influential role in the years to come. Now, first of all, there's a technical reason, perhaps, that the Doge, I mean, after that coin thing,
Yes, yes.
this organization, whatever, is because of conflict of interest potential issues. So I think he cannot be fully part of the cabinet or something because that could raise some conflict of interest issues. After all, SpaceX, among others, have huge contracts from the
That's right.
Pentagon, and he has been whining about federal regulations on when and how and where he's gonna launch his spaceships, right? So I think that's why there's some sort of a fuzziness around the circumstances of this department, whatever you want to call it. And then I just found it weird that for an efficiency department, it has two heads. Like, isn't that so inefficient that you have dalawa yung boss mo sa isang, you know? So anyway, putting that aside, I mean, initially, if you look at their plans, they wanted to cut down of the fiscal, budget deficit and also cut down jobs in massive numbers. But if you look at the latest numbers that are coming out, latest estimates are coming out, are much more realistic because I think there's an understanding that there's going to be a lot of institutional resistance from within, potentially even from other Republicans, on cutting down jobs for federal employees and cutting down expenditures. I mean, U.S. military spending is like crazy, right? So if you're going to cut down on other issues, some people are going to make an issue out of that, right? Especially if part of that military spending
Richard, you
is giving
mentioned,
billions
US
to
military
aid to
spending.
allies and friends.
That's very interesting. You mentioned U.S. military spending because in his several conversations he's had prior to this inauguration, he's talking about ramping up spending for the U.S. And not touching them in terms of downsizing. Let me rephrase: right sizing. Every other department will be right sized except the U.S. military.
Yeah, I mean,
Is
that was always
part of
the
positioning?
right.
Is
This
this
is
part of the positioning for the Middle East and China?
I mean, this was always the thing with even with Reagan, right? So we started this conversation going back to the address by Reagan in 1985. I mean, this thing about, we want to be a small government, but at the same time we have a huge military industrial complex, right? And if you're Elon Musk, who has spaceships that could be used by Pentagon for operations, high-end operations, communications related operations, and potentially an all-out war with a very sophisticated adversary, then there's a conflict of interest there. So
Right, that's right.
for me, Elon Musk is really the wild card when it comes to geopolitics, not only American foreign policy. So talking to diplomats from all around the world, Elon Musk keeps on popping up. Everyone is wondering what is his exact role, how much is he empowered, and to what degree is Elon Musk doing things in coordination with Donald Trump or not. If you saw the cover of the New Yorker magazine the other day, it shows like inaugurate ka na, diba? Something. It's like Elon Musk takes it and then like Trump is on the side. So the last time we saw something like that, it didn't end up very well for the non-elected person. I'm talking about Steve Bannon, right? If you remember,
Yes.
Steve Bannon was on Time Magazine's front page very early on, and Steve Bannon was getting all the credit for making a broken campaign into something transformational. Next thing you know, he was out, right? So people are wondering what makes Elon Musk more influential than Bannon, aside from the fact that he has $400 billion to his name, and of course 200 million followers to his name, right? So let's
Just
see.
have to wait and see.
Yeah, wait and see if Elon Musk has the emotional quotient. Yeah.
Let's see 100 days. Let's see after the 100 days, kamusta na ang relasyon nila? Is it, pasabi mo nga, Unity Team Part 2 ba ito? But let's talk about that later.
Maybe we can launch a Bitcoin about how many days, Elon Musk will last, or this MAGA movement will hold together. Yeah, yeah.
All right. The relationship between the Philippines and the United States is deeply rooted in history, with both countries sharing strong political, economic, and military ties. In recent years, the partnership has evolved, focusing on mutual security concerns in the Indo-Pacific region. This collaboration is reinforced through joint military exercises, defense agreements like the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, or EDCA, and shared commitments to uphold international law in the South China Sea. Now, President Bongbong Marcos has expressed optimism that the Philippines will continue to sustain and strengthen its ties with the U.S. under President Donald Trump's leadership.
Richard, we're transitioning to this China issue now. President Trump mentioned kanina yung Panama Canal and how he built it for Panama, and now China is operating inside the canal. So one of his rhetorics again. Now do we see, in terms of the Philippine relationship, based on the way Trump is talking and blaming China for everything, do we see more pressure put on China, which will be beneficial to us?
Well, I mean, again, we have to be very honest about it. Trump's own mind is indecipherable. He's sounding very conciliatory towards China. He's been over conciliatory towards TikTok. So some of our friends, including Duterte supporters in the Philippines, have been making a lot out of that. Remember that news about supposedly naimbita daw si Sara tapos hindi daw naimbita si BBM or whatever. So I mean, there's some folks in the Philippines who are politically invested in a certain very dodgy narrative that Trump is going to be nice to China and is going to throw BBM under the bus because BBM was buddy of Biden, forgetting that actually Imelda was a buddy of Trump well before Duterte even emerged in the imagination of Duterte. So there are a lot of mumbo jumbo analysis along those lines. Again, as I said, what we know here is that the people are going to run American foreign policy on a day-to-day basis. Marco Rubio, Elbridge Colby, a lot of people that we are very familiar with here in the Philippines. A lot of us have had conversations with, exchanges with. These are people who are not only traditionally minded, but they're also forward-looking in a sense that they recognize the U.S. has to help frontline states. Some of the important think tanks will play an important role in this administration are, for instance, the Heritage Foundation, right? They had a new report recently that said the U.S. has to give Philippines better weapon systems, including the F-16 fighters, among other things. So we're hearing a lot of positive signals from this incoming Republican administration in terms of helping frontline states. If Taiwan is a potentially Ukraine of Asia, then the Philippines is the Poland of Asia. It's just the next country in line, but it could be a very powerful country, very capable country, and a very self-assured middle power, just in the same way Poland is, not only in Eastern Europe, but within the NATO alliance. So I think there is a lot of reason to think that on a day-to-day basis, in terms of actual detailed minutiae plans, the Trump administration will be much more forthcoming in helping the Philippines on the China question, and that at the same time, of course, it will help the Philippines more, but in exchange, of course, it may also ask the Philippines to do more in terms of contributing to the Taiwan contingency plans, in terms of allowing more American weapons, HIMARS or Typhoon missile systems to be mobilized here. So nothing will come for free. So when I say they're tough on China, they want to help the Philippines, doesn't mean that the Philippines just can do whatever it wants. No. So I think this is where things are going to be tricky.
Richard, si Trump mentioned in his speech about building the American Iron Dome system, which will be American-made. Now, he never said that he would make it specifically just for the U.S. Possibly ba, can the Philippines benefit, maambunan tayo ng that American Iron Dome system na mailagay sa atin? Kasi now we have the Typhoon system in our own soil.
Well, there have been plans of X-band system, essentially from Japan, first island chain, no? You can start from Japan, go down to Taiwan.
The Iranian system, di ba? We have the Iranian system coming in also for the Philippines.
You mean the Israeli?
The Israeli
The Israeli, yeah. I think
right.
yes, but I think the most important plan here is that, essentially, THAAD missile system is also something else we're looking at. Because the Typhoon is an offensive system. It's more as hitting. But if you want defensive, it's more the THAAD system, which the South Koreans already have. I think the Japanese and Guam American forces are moving in that direction. I think eventually one big plan could be a kind of an arc, right? A wall, a great wall of missile systems facing China. So from Japan and Korea, yeah, yeah, and for the Philippines, actually, that's the cheapest thing, di ba? Kasi napakamahalang submarines. It will take you billions and billions of dollars and years to develop submarines. Fighter jets are not cheap. Training for them will take years. But those missile systems could be deployed pretty efficiently and quickly. We saw that in the recent tit for tat missile launches in between Iran and Israel in the Middle East. So actually, it's very possible to see that in the coming years, that the Philippines' main discussion would be to get more of these missile systems based here, not to mention us also purchasing more BrahMos systems and more advanced hypersonic versions of that, just as the Japanese. That's why the conversation is no longer just Philippines and US. It's trilateral. It's Japan, Philippines, US. Japan, Philippines, US, with Korea, Australia, and India also in the wings. So yes, a kind of a great wall of missile systems seems to be the cheapest and most efficient way to get China's attention and to make invasion of Taiwan and invasion of mainland Philippines increasingly impossible, or at least highly costly for China. So yes, that's the deterrence game that we're looking at. So I think that's something that we're going to see doubling down on when it comes to the Trump 2.0 administration. Again, day-to-day basis. Now, at the same time, obviously, no one knows with Trump. He wants to cut a grand bargain with China, whatever. No one knows. So I think there's no point in discussing something that is unknowable. But what is knowable is these things that we discussed so far.
But Richard, we have yet, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, we have yet to see or hear any statement released by Trump administration even before his first, the first term niya,
Yeah, first term
2017, about his stand on the West Philippine Sea.
Walang official stand except
diba?
kay Rubio lang.
Oo, walang ganon. So, what does this tell us?
Again, the point is we have to wait for the national defense strategy to come in. I mean, the last time you had the Trump 1.0 administration, Elbridge Colby is going to run the policy at the Pentagon, was one of the chief architects of that. What I'm going to wait for in the coming months or so, probably by next year, hopefully, at most, we have a new national defense strategy and national security strategy. There, we're going to have a very clear idea about where America stands in terms of the global picture. But one thing that we have seen over the past decade is tremendous amount of bipartisan continuity, right? So,
Yes.
I see this in my own interaction in DC over the past decade. In 2014-15, we were begging Americans to pay more attention to the Philippines, dilemma in the South China Sea. From 2016 onwards, Biden, Trump, and Trump 2.0, I think all of them agree that China is the primary strategic threat. But the devil is in the details, right? What are the methodologies? What are the initiatives? Those are the things that will come out. Of course, not the confidential parts, but the broad brushstrokes will come in the national defense strategy. So that's something we're going to look at. And of course, if there's going to be a new version of that compared to the 2018 one. And then, of course, there's going to be bilateral and trilateral dialogues between Philippines and U.S. and Philippine, U.S. and Japan. Those ones are also things that we're going to look at. I think the Philippines could also come up with its own national security strategy in the near future.
Yeah.
So I think what we have to all accept is that we are in a complete new era when it comes to geopolitical uncertainty. The Chinese are on the edge. The Russians are on the edge. We are on the edge, but I guess even the Americans are on the edge, wondering. Exactly. So on the edge should be our next show. And on that note, I know you have a lot of fantastic. Yeah, fantastic.
Sorry kasi medyo we're pressed for time, but I'd like to get your thoughts on this national emergency sa immigration. Quickly let us know kung ano yung pakay ni Trump by involving the military here and the National Guard by declaring the emergency. Does it make things easier to kick off yung immigration policies niya?
Well, again, I see all of your guests from the US are lining up there, and someone also reminded us about Vivek withdrawing for the Doge. But I'm just saying, for Vivek to be in the consideration together with Elon was ridiculous. But going back to this, no, this is going to be a massive operation. If you want to kick out 1 million people, right, or at least hundreds of thousands of people in your first 100 days, I mean, if you're listening to Stephen Miller and some of these folks, who will oversee the immigration policy, this is going to be a whole of nation approach, which will require massive mobilization of not only law enforcement, but potentially also the armed forces of the United States. For me, what is important right now, and I heard the same thing when I was in India, few weeks ago is that we have to negotiate with the Americans to make sure that the first waves of people who will be essentially kicked out of America, because a lot of people will be affected by this, will not be Filipinos, will not be Indian Americans, right? We have to leverage it. So these essentially the speculation is that the first migrants will be targeted are mostly from countries, I don't know, like Haiti, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Central American countries, or some of the Latin American countries who are much more, let's just say, pliable or compliant or willing to work with the American administration, while probably the Filipino community, we were talking about hundreds of thousands, much bigger even for the Indian American community. That's a much larger community, and it could be much more geopolitically explosive if indeed America moves in that direction. But I'm 100% sure that in the first 100 days of the Trump 2.0 administration, the Stephen Miller types, they will make sure that the world knows they're serious about this. Because I think just in the same way that the drug war was undergirding Duterte's, essentially, it was the animating force of Duterte's 100 years in power. I think the immigration policy is going to be the animating force in the 100 days of Donald Trump administration. So I think we have to take his words almost literally, not just seriously, when it comes to the immigration issue. Just the scale of that, and which communities will be affected, let's see, because it's gonna be unprecedented. I don't think we have seen any country on the verge of conducting what the Republican new incoming administration is signaling right now. But I'm all ears for our guests from the U.S., who I'm sure know much more on this issue.
Before you leave, Richard, as we speak, the border wall is being, as ordered by President Trump, immediately to be resume. The word was resume construction again.
Well, I'm not sure it works with the cartels. Although he said that he's gonna, I don't know if you watched was that the Vin Diesel movie? Like they can make a tunnel below the wall. So the wall is metaphorical, probably, right? And now that the cartels have been designated as terrorist organization, I wonder also in terms of operational responses. Does that mean that the U.S. will conduct, I don't know, drone attacks within Mexican territory? I mean, we can look at or in Colombia or I think even Costa Rica is
Baka Trump can send the cartel leaders a picture of their houses like he does with the Taliban leaders.
So because that's what we saw, right? Terrorist organization in the Middle East have been targeted with U.S. drones, right?
Yes.
In violation of sovereignty of multiple countries, including allied countries like Pakistan. So does that mean that Mexico should be prepared for drone attacks by the U.S.? Those will be major geopolitical issues that we have to also look at in the coming months.
And you have to remember, hindi na Gulf of Mexico yan. Gulf of America daw. So, ang daming...
Was that California, Mexican California? Like, yes, I'm Team Mexico. Yes.
All right.
Well, thank you for joining us. As always, geopolitical analyst Richard Haydarian. It's a pleasure. We hope to have you soon again.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Medyo pagod ako. Tuloy lang natin ito discussion tonight. Marami tayong pag-usapan. Welcome to the new era